Good morning on this Sunday, November 6th, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. It's the final stretch as we head into Election Day, and all eyes are on Georgia for governor and U.S. Senate. Republicans and Democrats calling the big guns on the campaign trail. Also, the city of Atlanta names its new police chief, and Zoo Atlanta changes its weapons policy, allowing guns on property. Melita, Phil, Theron, and Martha are all here. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
Election Day just 2 days away, finally. We can finally say that. The latest Insider Advantage poll shows Governor Kemp's lead widening over Democrat Stacey Abrams. It was a busy week for both as they called on the big names from their respective parties to rally voters.
Vote, Georgia, vote to re-elect Governor Brian Kemp to 4 more years.
Former Vice President Mike Pence returned to the Peach State to join Governor Brian Kemp on the campaign trail Tuesday.
We lost, I think, the 2020 race because we didn't have a good ground game in the state, and we have one now, but we're not finished with that. We've got to finish working the rest of the week all the way through when the polls close on Tuesday.
Meanwhile, his challenger, Stacey Abrams, had former President Barack Obama stumping for her.
Inflation is a global phenomenon, but the pain is local.
She sat down with Fox 5's Russ Spencer on the campaign trail.
We deserve more. We deserve a governor who actually wants to invest in our families, invest in our futures, but also willing to spend the resources that hardworking Georgians and federal Democrats have delivered to the state to do more now, instead of giving money to the wealthy and the powerful.
Abrams focusing her message on the expansion of Medicaid, pointing the finger at Governor Kemp for the closure of Atlanta Medical Center, which closed this week. Theron, to you first this week, what do you think of the closing messages, and do you believe the polling that Stacey Abrams is several points behind Governor Kemp?
Well, I woke up this morning, Lori, I'm in my blue. I just want to remind our viewers that, Democrats won in 2020 and 2021. And if I look at the messaging from the campaigns up and down the ticket, if I look at the early vote numbers, I'm inspired because I think that, look, President Barack Obama said it best. Let's make sure we go out, make sure we vote. Let's do it again, Georgia. And I think that, I think we will do that again. The challenge, though, I don't think the poll is as wide as it says. I think if you really look at the polling, the demographics, it's overwhelming Republicans. It's not a true reflection of, I think, where the electorate is. Last thing I'll say is this, Lori. I think the November 9th surprise for me will be what will women do and decide this race. I think at the end of the day, women will elect the governor, they'll elect the U.S. Senator, and I do believe there's a quiet minority of women out there, white, black, Hispanic, Asian, that are not telling their spouses, not telling their friends about how upset they are on the Dobbs decision, and will express their anger and passion at the poll.
Martha, what about that? Because I did see a poll this week about white suburban women really focusing on the economy and voting more Republican than leaning Democrat.
Well, and I've said that a number of times here, that I think when you're talking about single women, that the Dobbs decision may have had an impact, and those folks might have been voting Democrat anyway. But I have said for weeks here and in other places that women with children and families are going to be voting about the here and now, not what might happen in the future, and they're going to vote Republican. I do think that we've had this tone deafness in the Democratic campaign about how they schedule things. And look, I'm a Georgia Bulldog fan, all right? Stacey Abrams is scheduling an event that happened on Saturday. We're taping on Friday at 3 o'clock. Okay, and it's got Beyonce's mom. Okay, I think if Beyonce came, they could get a huge crowd out at 3 o'clock on a Saturday. And it's not just the University of Georgia. Georgia Tech has games, Georgia State has games, Kennesaw has games. If you're going to do something like that, you need to do it in the morning or in the evening, not right in the middle of the day.
Well, Phil, a lot of political pundits said that Stacey Abrams had a really strong debate performance in her third and final debate. She doubled down, calling the sheriffs across the state kind of good old boys, and she wasn't going to support them, and she isn't surprised that she doesn't have their support.
Well, I thought she had a pretty good debate performance, but that was a really bad line to smear 107 sheriffs around the state, including some African-American sheriffs. That's crazy. And she had to walk it back, and so that was the big takeaway.
And
social media, social media blew up on that, and I think Theron and I talk about the African-American vote, and if you go to GeorgiaVotes.com, which we all look at, as of Friday morning when we taped, my goodness, it's below 30%. It was 29%. I was surprised myself to see that low a vote. Usually, traditionally, historically, the Democrats do very well in early voting. So again, Election Day will be the deciding vote. And Lori, you make a good point. I see in the polls on the Real Clear Politics average, white female suburban voters shifting to Republicans, including in Georgia.
Melita, what about some of these early turnout numbers? Because the African-American vote was up at about 34%. It's down to about 29.2.
It was, yes, it was up
but, former President Barack Obama came and he rallied the troops. He was on message.
Well, and you had Trevor Noah taping in Atlanta this week with great interviews with Raphael Warnock and Stacey Abrams to go after the younger demographic. I think the vote, and the other thing about early voting is we're not sure whether this is cannibalizing Election Day turnout or if it's truly a shift in pattern, a new pattern to vote early based on how easy it was to vote during COVID early, and people are just shifting. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how many people turn out on Tuesday. Already, as we tape, record-setting numbers are voting early on Friday. Thursday was a record-setting day. So these records, I think, are good for Democrats.
Theron, you're very enthusiastic today as we tape. What about the enthusiasm factor when it comes to Stacey Abrams? Because I've talked to some folks who've been to her fundraisers, and they say that, the fire just isn't there like it was 4 years ago. Do you think that's why she's maybe lagging in the polls behind Brian Kemp this time?
No, I think she's in a sort of close race with an incumbent governor. And so anybody, if you're running against a Democrat or Republican, you're a challenger, you got to actually try to convince the people why this man or woman should be fired. I think the enthusiasm is still there, but the truth of the matter is, Lori, I know where you're going with this, is that, look, the Stacey Abrams 4 years ago was kind of, she snuck up on Republicans, right? They underestimated her ability to register voters. They underestimated her abilities to do well in rural counties, and they underestimated her abilities to turn counties like Cobb and Gwinnett truly blue. But let me say something real quick about the black vote. You got to remember, the black vote in 2018, 2020 was around 27, 28%. We're still above that right now. And the fact that we have over 2 million people that have voted, the one thing that we're not talking about is that the white male vote is down. All right, and so we don't go around here, and the Democrats don't do this and say, "Oh, look at all the white men; they're not voting." But it's over this overpolarization of the black vote, and I think that ultimately the black voters will do what they traditionally do; they will show up and vote. But I think ultimately both candidates have got to do better with white women and white men. But no, the enthusiasm is there, as Melita pointed out. I mean, Trevor Noah, Kerry Will, all these people coming out, and Laura and Martha, I'm happy to see that Tina Knowles is coming to town. She is not Beyonce, but she's still a very good woman that I think people want to see.
It was the timing. She thought it was good. It's just the timing.
But not everybody watches football.
Yeah, well, 95% in Georgia Saturday.
What I love about the Trevor Noah video that you posted about how he was like, "Oh, I came to Atlanta and I loved it. There's black people everywhere. Everything was great." And he was like, "We loved it." Because if you're watching ads, or if you're probably going to fundraisers in California for Stacey Abrams, they're painting Georgia as if it's some kind of Handmaid's Tale kind of dystopian place to live. And they're coming here and finding out, whether you're in Atlanta or somewhere else, there are things happening in Georgia. There are places being built. I took a trip down to Jekyll Island for a meeting with the school board where I went through a lot of small towns because we don't like driving on 16. There are places being built for people to work in small towns all over Georgia. And that's what people are responding to. And when you talk about the woman that's not telling her husband how she's going to vote, there's a lot of people that voted Democrat the last time that are going to vote Republican this time because of that.
Just a real quick footnote, though, to Theron. A few weeks ago, you were saying the African-American vote, you really needed to get up to 31, 32 for a win. And maybe you'll get it. Maybe you'll get it on Election Day. I don't know. But I will say this: historically, more whites are voting on Election Day than they early vote. More Democrats historically.
But the white male vote is down, all right?
Right now. But I'm just saying they vote more on Election Day.
And black men are up.
Well, yes.
But I don't know. For grabs.
I don't know. Yeah, they're up for grabs.
Melita.
Well, I was going to say, they need places to work in those rural towns because they don't have rural broadband at the places where they live out on the farm.
Okay. Now, I will say, in Governor Kemp's defense, he's really pushed that issue.
$1 billion has been spent by Governor Kemp just in the last couple of years to get rural broadband, so let's not forget that.
So I just wanted to be fair there and point that out. Okay, coming up, will we know who will be Georgia's next U.S. Senator, or will we have another 4 weeks on the campaign trail for Senator Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker? We'll discuss next.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
Polling still shows a split ticket in Georgia. Governor Brian Kemp has a strong lead in the governor's race, but in the Senate race, it shows incumbent Senator Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker locked in a dead heat, with neither one making it over the 50+1 threshold. Melita, some Republicans say that Stacey Abrams is dragging Raphael Warnock down. What do you think about that statement?
Well, I think that's wishful thinking and said in hopes of turning the voters who would vote for Warnock away from voting. I think that's just wishful thinking, and the main article about that came from a very Republican-leaning publication. I think Warnock's interview with Trevor Noah was masterful, as compared to the clip of Herschel Walker dissing President Obama and offering to compare his resume with Obama's any day.
Phil, what about that? Because comparing the former president's resume to Herschel Walker's, I don't know if that was a strong argument there.
Well, I think it was a cheap shot by Obama to begin with, and these are two males going to be clashing on it. I don't think that's going to make a bit of difference because, hey, it's inflation and crime and educational transparency. The real clear politics, again, I'll quote that, the average of all polling has it as a runoff. Even the Democrat polling guru Nate Silver is saying that Georgia could go Republican. It'll be a big day Tuesday. By the way, as you know, Lori, Fox 5 and Insider Advantage will have the final poll of the race on Monday, and that'll tell us a lot.
Martha?
Look, Reverend Warnock has raised 3 times as much money as Herschel Walker. Herschel Walker raised $37 million, which would have been enough in anybody's dreams 5 years ago to be able to run a campaign. So even with 3 times as much money being spent, and who knows how much outside money too, is still in a dead heat, which is pretty amazing because I don't think the level of negative advertising I've seen in any race. Now, it appears that the Herschel Walker campaign is now getting more negative at the end. They've done a lot more of that looking in the camera kind of thing. So is it going to go to a runoff? What you see is Walker is running his campaign as if he wants to win and finish it in regulation, and Warnock is acting more like he thinks it's going to be a runoff and be overtime.
Well, Theron, this week we saw Walker's second accuser that he allegedly paid for her abortion come forward for a network TV interview. Republicans said this was just a last-minute desperate attempt to attack him. We were talking about this last week on the show. It was like, will she come forward? Then maybe she has credibility.
And I said that there was a lot of time left in this race. And I went back and looked at the clip on YouTube. And thank you, Fox 5, for getting it up on YouTube. And I said to then Janelle and to Phil, and the question I still ask, if the woman, the accuser, this woman shows her face, will you still vote for this man? Because now, not only did she show her face, and to Melita's point last week, she showed some cards that was signed with the letter H. She had pictures of them together, and she gave very detailed and concerning descriptions of the threats that she received from Herschel Walker to go get an abortion. And so I still ask the question again this week, like, are Republicans willing and that desperate to vote for someone who now has had an accuser come forward and show her face, this very brave woman, to basically detail the violent consistency and basically the falsehoods that this guy is projected. And so I think that, if Janelle was here, she's not here, I think she would probably say, yeah, okay, now the woman's showing her face, I got to.
We don't know what she's going to say, but I do know this. This woman came out at the last minute. It's a desperation shot. Herschel Walker flatly says it's a lie. And the Democrats have pulled this time and again. How come this woman didn't come out when Herschel announced, for example? How come?
No, my point is this, Phil. Shame on you for not taking this woman seriously. And
we don't know.
She's there. And then the second thing I want to say is this. I think that Herschel Walker, the polls are not real. I think I've run into so many Kemp Warnock voters out there, black, white, Asian, Hispanic. Warnock will win this race without a runoff. And I think that the polls are wrong. And I think that Georgia voters know that we cannot send Herschel Walker to the U.S.
Martha and then Melita.
Look, I think that in general, if something happened before his interview in 2009, a lot of people are not taking it into consideration. But what I would say about the woman, and I watched it, I thought it was compelling, but there was also another woman named Tara Reid who gave a very compelling description of a rape by Joe Biden that came out during the 2020 election when she was working for him. The New York Times did a number of articles about it. They did a podcast about it. They were able to corroborate everything but the incident because it happened in a rather private place. And she was not believed by Democrats. She was not believed by out there. I'm not saying either one's right or they exclude each other, but there are many instances of men that have been accused of things like this, and they're in office today.
Melita?
Well, I think this woman's account was very credible. And then to have Herschel dismiss her as some woman I do not know when she had described a 6-year affair was evidence that Herschel is untethered from the truth and probably wouldn't know the truth if it tackled him.
So Democrats wouldn't just trot her out at the last minute. Why didn't she come forward way before this if she's credible? I don't see the credibility. And plus, inflation and crime and everything are going to dominate on Tuesday, and this is a secondary aspect.
To respond to Martha's point, the difference between Joe Biden and Herschel Walker is this. President Biden went on television and answered the hard questions. He did an interview about it. He did a couple interviews about it. The media needs to push Herschel Walker to demand more out of him on this situation. They have let him off the hook. Innocent until proven guilty. I say this every week on this show. Don't rush to judgment. But he has not answered the hard questions. Will the media ask him the questions that they asked Joe Biden about this alleged affair?
Well, he won't let the media ask him questions because he's in a velvet rope strategy.
He's calling it a lie.
Making a speech.
He's calling it a lie.
He's answered it time and time again that it's a lie, it's a lie, it's a lie. So.
And by the way, innocent until proven guilty, you've called Trump every name in the book, including being a criminal and everything else.
One more issue, because
I say he's on investigation.
We'll know the results next week, hopefully. So
we will.
One more issue I want to get to. The AJC with an article this week that we may actually get election results earlier than usual. This go around at least. And Phil, I guess we'll believe it when I see it.
That's right. You know, there's always somebody. There's always somebody that goes to a judge and say, you know, you got to stop this and 1 more hour. We need 1 more hour for the polls to stay open. So I don't know about Fulton County.
Well, the difference is that they can start counting on Election Day.
That's good.
They don't have to wait for the polls to close at 7 p.m. They just can't tabulate them or report any results until polls close.
True.
Right.
But I think there are going to be some legislative seats that are very, very close in some of these newly created gerrymandered districts where the margins are really close. And I'm not sure that all of those will be readily available results.
But that's always the case, that we have a few seats that take a while. But I think we're going to know fairly early in the evening how this comes out. And I think this is going to be a resounding it'll be enough of a win that people aren't going to be able to challenge it.
All right, we'll see. Coming up, Atlanta Mayor Andre Dickens makes his pick for police chief. We'll discuss next.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
Well, the city of Atlanta has a new police chief, sort of. Monday, Mayor Andre Dickens announced interim police chief Darren Schierbaum will serve as Atlanta's next chief of police, replacing police chief Rodney Bryant, who retired this past summer. Phil, you've been impressed with Chief Schierbaum. Has he done enough to appease some of these Buckhead residents that are still pushing for cityhood?
Well, as I've said before, I'm cautiously optimistic, and I'm glad that Mayor Dickens did name him as the permanent chief. He is working very well, for example, with the state and Governor Kemp and with the Fulton County Sheriff Pat Labatt. Obviously, the police department was broken by former Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms. It's going to take at least a couple years to get the manpower up, and so I wish him well. You're still going to have the cityhood debate no matter what in the legislature, but fingers crossed.
Darren, is this good for police morale?
Absolutely. That's where I was going, Lori. I mean, when you talk to the men and women at APD, and I try to ask them the first question, how are you doing? You know, how's public safety? But I asked them about the morale. And I think what Chief Schierbaum has done, Lori, is that really has focused on that morale. He's accessible. You know, and I think also the mayor knew that as he talks to this chief on a daily basis, I think they have calls in the morning to kind of get reports from the day before, the night before, is that he went ahead and made this choice because he's like, look, we're in November. We've had a good year so far, but I want to show the men and women of APD that we got a steady hand at the wheel. We don't, let's end this search. This is my guy. And the last thing I would say is that the ability for Chief Schierbaum to be very accessible, but also use technology, I think that's how we've seen a reduction in crime. So morale is up. He deserves it, and ultimately I think the mayor should be applauded for basically making this appointment.
Well, an update now on the weapons policy at Zoo Atlanta. It will now allow guests to carry guns. Back in September, the zoo banned people from bringing weapons onto the property, but changed the policy. Melita, this was an issue that you wanted to discuss.
Well, I just think it's a very interesting issue. I'm not sure that all families want to see guns on the hips of others when they're taking their children to see the zoo, and yet the zoo is in a box because of the law, the constitutional carry, allow guns everywhere law, that they had to change this policy. And I'm hoping that cooler heads will prevail in the legislature so that families can feel safe at places like the zoo and not have guns everywhere.
Martha, are we likely to see any changes at the Capitol?
Depending on what happens Tuesday, but I would say no, and I would say that Zoo Atlanta is following the law, and that's what they should do.
Can I just say this though? I went to the zoo recently. Close friends of ours, the Makersons, I had a birthday party there, and I just got to compliment the zoo. I mean, it's an amazing experience.
It's
I mean,
I
grew up, you know, in Athens, wanted to come see Willoughby. You know, that was the gorilla that we all want to see. And so I do, Melita, I think you bring up a good point. When I went there recently, this new gun policy wasn't in place. I didn't see anybody walking around with a gun. But I think that to Martha's point too, they're kind of forced because you're right, we do have this state law. So ultimately, I think they have kind of like made it an experience, and I just hope that they just bring a level of humanity and understanding to it that, you know, people do have the right to bear arms. It's a Second Amendment conversation, but we just want to derail the experience.
I just want to make sure that we get this in because we lost a great this week.
Oh, yeah,
the former UGA coach and former athletic director Vince Dooley. Phil, I know that we all have stories about Vince Dooley we could share, but what a loss, but what a great man. I don't know if there's anybody who says anything bad about him.
Well, I know it, and he had a great run, obviously, as the coach at the University of Georgia, and of course he was athletic director, and there were so many testimonials to how he mentored people. I know artist Steve Pendley actually did a book on how his gardening was. You know, you think about his athleticism, but gardening, and so, and even endorsed Herschel Walker before he passed. How about that?
And I saw the in memoriam before that ad airs now. Martha.
Yeah, I mean, look, he was one of the greats. I got to meet him when I was actually volunteering for the Dukakis campaign because he was giving a donation, and I volunteered to drive John Dukakis over there. And he, at the end of the visit, John turned to me, that was the son of Mike Dukakis, and said, "That's why you came, isn't it? You wanted to meet Vince Dooley." And I said, "That's right." So I was a 27-year-old volunteer, and it was great.
You know, I interviewed him, Theron, just right after his stroke, and during that interview, we were both in tears. I mean, he's just so gracious and such a kind man.
Very kind. I mean, as Phil pointed out to Martha, just a beloved figure. And I want to also compliment him for in the early 1970s. I think it was either 1970 or 1971 when we had our first black football players at the University of Georgia, how Vince Dooley set the tone, welcomed them, made them feel safe, gave them the same shot that he gave his white players. And so I definitely want to commend him for that.
Melita, final thoughts?
Well, and I knew him when I was a sports stringer at UGA for the Macon Telegraph, believe it or not. But he was a great gardener. There are flowers named for him. How many football coaches can say that? And he was a great humanitarian. There's a lot of charitable work. And there was an orphanage in Honduras that has a sports field named for him. And the students there had a memorial tribute to him earlier in the week.
Touching, very touching. All right, everybody, coming up, winners and losers. Stay tuned.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
Melita, we'll start with you this week.
Thank you. Well, first, congratulations to Phil for his James Magazine reception on Thursday evening. I finally got to meet his better half. He does have one.
Thank you.
Earlier this week, I was impressed with the persistence of Ida Simmons of Attapulgis, Georgia, 105 years old, and she trotted in on her walker and assisted by her 81-year-old son to vote. And if ladies like that and the other more than 100-year-old Georgians who have voted early can vote, there's no excuse for anybody else.
Absolutely. We should all be so lucky and blessed. Phil.
Well, that was a good winner. I've got a winner, and that would be, let's see, Kwanzaa Hall. That surprised me. The former congressman had John Lewis's seat. He came out and endorsed the Republican candidate for Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones. How about that? So there is some bipartisanship here that we talk about. Also, I got to have as a loser, I'm sorry, Senator Raphael Warnock. You know, it's a scandal with the open borders policy, fentanyl coming in, etc. Warnock voted to end the catch and release policy, and he also voted to not to remove the illegals with felony convictions. Those are two terrible votes I wanted the viewers to know about.
Theron.
All right, congratulations on your James Magazine event. I heard it was a great event. I definitely want to make Chief Shearbaum a winner this week, and also want to send my condolences to the family of half of the Migos Takeoff. Who passed away in Houston, got shot with gun violence. And so Offset is still alive. Takeoff, unfortunately, was murdered. Someone else was actually shot with Quavo. And so I definitely want to recognize Takeoff for all the great work that he done in the community and had a really good music career.
Martha.
So, of course, you know, there are so many people out there that are contributing to this election, but it is great to have all of the volunteers out there that are doing work. I mean, I can't tell you how many I met this week, and so just collectively, political volunteers are certainly winners this week. Loser's got to be President Joe Biden for that speech he gave, another kind of tone-deaf speech that kind of calls out half the country and really wasn't based by fact. So I think he needs to work hard.
We will leave it there, everybody. Don't forget to go vote. We will have a lot to talk about next week. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Amen to that.